Rewind. Today we're on number 4, part B. And we started it off. There are 3 scripture verses that are really key to this particular series. The first one is found in Daniel 11:32, and it says there, "Those who do wickedly against the covenant, he shall corrupt with flattery. But the people who know their God shall be strong and carry out great exploits." And in Matthew 5:8, Jesus' famous message on the Sermon on the Mount. Thanks, Louise, your anointing is catching. Matthew 5:8, "God blesses you when your heart is pure, for then your eyes will open to see more and more of him." And then Jeremiah 29:13-14, "If you look for me wholeheartedly, you will find me. I will be found by you, says the Lord." Over this year, it's my aim to give us all a broader outlook on God through history than we've ever had before, so that we can better identify his working in our current world situation. It's also my intention that a greater passion to know God is ignited inside each and every one of us. I've personally found this year that I've been praying, "God, I want to know you more than I've ever prayed it in the past." We live in uncertain times, and I believe that to hang in there and do good in the current global and local environment that we're facing, we need to have a very secure foundation. A foundation that's not built on our ability to manage things. A foundation that's not shaken by changes of government here or overseas. A foundation that can endure every economic downturn and setback that a global economy faces. A foundation that can persist in the midst of the change we're experiencing in society, where people are moving from apathy toward faith to outright hostility. A foundation that can cope with every challenge and curveball that life throws our way with kindness and compassion. And if you think you're going to find that type of foundation in your bank balance or your job security, you're in for a rude shock. You won't find it looking to government policy, regardless of which party is in power, because even our politicians have little control over the external fiscal and societal pressures facing our country from outside, not just inside our borders. You won't find it in the media or celebrities. And Lee Sales, while she's a great interviewer, hasn't got an answer for any of the discrepancies that she uncovers when she goes hard after our country's leaders. What we need is a foundation that stands the test of time and remains unmoved by the rise and fall of societies, cultures, and in our world today, nations. Which means we need to have our eyes firmly fixed on the one who was there before anything started and will still be there when everything has been rolled up and finished. God is the only one who can give you peace in the midst of chaos, the chaos that is currently filling the earth, because over and over again throughout history, he's been the one who's caused his people to flourish in the midst of incredible adversity time and time again. But it's hard to have confidence in someone you only know second hand. Now, you may have gotten by on a casual relationship in the past, but that won't cut it going forward. Hence this series. So if you haven't been here for one of our messages prior to 4B, make sure you catch up. They're all on our website, hobart.org.au. Really easy web address to remember. And they're all videoed, so they're all up there, so you can go back over them and listen to them. Today we pick up a series with the birth of Isaac's 2 sons. Isaac had 2 sons, they were twins. The firstborn was Esau and the secondborn was Jacob. Esau was his dad's favourite and Jacob was his mum's favourite. A recipe for family conflict, if ever there was one. Esau liked the outdoors whilst Jacob was a bit of a homebody. Genesis 25:29-34. As the boys grew up, Esau became a skillful hunter. He was an outdoorsman, but Jacob had a quiet temperament, preferring to stay at home. Isaac loved Esau because he enjoyed eating the wild game Esau brought home, but Rebekah loved Jacob. One day when Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau arrived home from the wilderness, exhausted and hungry. Esau said to Jacob, "I'm starved, give me some of that red stew." This is how Esau got his name, got his other name, Edom, which means red. "All right," Jacob replied, "but trade me your rights as the firstborn son." "Look, I'm dying of starvation," said Esau. "What good is my birthright to me now?" But Jacob said, "First you must swear that your birthright is mine." So Esau swore an oath, thereby selling all his rights as the firstborn to his brother Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau some bread and lentil stew. Esau ate the meal, then got up and left. He showed contempt for his rights as the firstborn. Now, birthright was an honour given to the firstborn, bestowing head of household status and the right to inherit their father's estate. The son with the birthright would receive a double portion of whatever was passed down. Now, Esau later on married two Hittite ladies, Judith and Basmath, who caused his parents all sorts of grief. It's interesting to note that later on in his life, he married the daughter of his uncle Ishmael, called Mahalath, which went a long way toward healing the rift between himself and his parents. Given the amount of effort that Abraham had gone to make sure that Isaac married into within his family line, it's no wonder that Esau's actions caused his parents so much distress. When Isaac instructed Jacob to only marry from within his ancestral lineage, Esau had his aha moment, which is why he then went and sought out his uncle's daughter in marriage. Now, why was it so important to Abraham and Isaac that their sons marry into the family and not marry women from the surrounding nations? It was because of the promise that God had given to them. He would make them into a great nation. For that to happen, they needed their own identity. There was a risk that if their children married into the families around them, that their family line would then get swallowed up by the more established families already living in Canaan. We saw this exact same thing happening in Australia in the early 1900s when immigrants from Italy arrived on our shores. They realised that their cultural identity could quite easily get swallowed up in the new country that they were now living in. And to avoid that, they would often send their children back to the home country to find a bride or a groom when they were of marrying age. As Isaac approached the end of his life, according to custom, he decided it was time to pass on his blessing to his firstborn son Esau. So he asked Esau to prepare for him his favourite meal, which meant that Esau had to go out and hunt some wild game. Rebekah overheard Isaac speaking to Esau, so she had Jacob, her son, her favourite son, pretend to be Esau so he could get the blessing pretend to be Esau so he could get the blessing whilst Esau was out hunting. Isaac, who was nearly blind at the time, wasn't able to tell the difference between Jacob and Esau and ended up giving Jacob the firstborn blessing. When Esau arrived back from his hunt and brought his prepared dish to his father, Isaac was surprised, and they both realised that they'd been duped by Jacob and his mum. Esau then planned to kill Jacob after his father had died. And his mother, realising this, sent Jacob away to her brother's household with instructions to marry one of his uncle's daughters. Isaac had by this time gotten over his anger with Jacob, and he sent him off with his blessing to Paddan Aram. Now, on the way there, Jacob had an encounter with God somewhere between Beersheba and Haran, where he had stopped for the night. Genesis 28, reading from verse 10. Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. When he reached a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun had set. Usually happens at night, doesn't it? Taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep. He had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. There above it stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you." Then Jacob made a vow, saying, "If God will be with me and will watch over me on this journey I'm taking, and will give me food to eat and clothes to wear, so that I return safely to my father's household, then the Lord will be my God, and this stone that I've set up as a pillar will be God's house, and all that you give me, I will give you a tenth." Jacob then travelled to his uncle's farm, where he fell in love with Laban's younger daughter, Rachel, and he asked to marry her. His uncle agreed on the proviso that Jacob worked for him for 7 years. Imagine having to do that, work for somebody for 7 years just to get to marry their daughter. Jacob agreed, and the next 7 years flew past, and then on his wedding night, his uncle does a switch, and unbeknownst to Jacob, he ends up marrying Rachel's older sister, Leah. His uncle makes up an excuse about the older sister needing to be married first, but he agrees to Jacob also marrying Rachel if he will work for him for another 7 years. Jacob doesn't have a choice, and he signs up for another 7 years of servitude. Over the next years, there's constant fighting between the two sisters, and life at home is anything but pleasant. Children are born to both sisters, and they're used as pawns to gain Jacob's favour. When Jacob wants to return to his family, Laban says that God has blessed him because Jacob is working for him, and he wants him to stay, and Jacob agrees. After Jacob sets out his conditions, his uncle agrees to them on the surface, but then does everything he can to swindle Jacob out of his wages yet again. Genesis 30:25. After Rachel gave birth to Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, "Send me on my way so I can go to my homeland. Give me my wives and children for whom I have served you, and I will be on my way. You know how much work I've done for you." But Laban said to him, "If I have found favour in your eyes, please stay. I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you." He added, "Name your wages and I will pay them." Jacob said to him, "You know how I have worked for you and how your livestock has fared under my care. The little you have had before I came here has increased greatly, and the Lord has blessed you wherever I have been. But now, when may I do something for my own household? What shall I give you?" he asked. "Don't give me anything," Jacob replied. "But if you will do this one thing for me, I will go on tending your flocks and watching over them. Let me go through all your flocks today and remove from them every speckled or spotted sheep, every dark-coloured lamb, and every spotted or speckled goat. They will be my wages, and my honesty will testify for me in the future. Whenever you check on the wages you have paid me, any goat in my possession that is not speckled or spotted, or any lamb that is not dark-coloured, will be considered stolen." "Agreed," said Laban. "Let it be as you have said." That same day, Laban removed all the male goats that were streaked or spotted, and all the speckled or spotted female goats, all that had white on them, and all the dark-coloured lambs, and he placed them in the care of his sons. Then he put a 3-day journey between himself and Jacob, while Jacob continued to tend the rest of Laban's flocks. But that didn't stop God blessing Jacob. And Jacob's flocks continued to increase, whilst Laban's kept getting smaller and weaker. The upshot was that Laban's sons started to get jealous of Jacob, and God said it was time for Jacob to head back home. Jacob heard that Laban's sons were saying, "Jacob has taken everything our father owned and has gained all his wealth from what belonged to our father." And Jacob noticed that Laban's attitude toward him was not what it had been. Then the Lord said to Jacob, "Go back to the land of your fathers and to your relatives, and I will be with you." Now on the way home, Jacob has an encounter with God that changes him and his family line forever. Genesis 32. That night Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. After he sent them across the stream, he sent over all of his possessions. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket. Am I up? I haven't.
Yeah, that's right.
Am?
You were there.
I was there.
Yeah.
Then the man said, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob replied, I will not let you go unless you bless me." The man asked him, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered. Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome." Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." But he replied, "Why do you ask me my name?" Then he blessed him there. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life, it was because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." Now I want us to pause here today and take a step back from the story and see if we can identify some lessons that we can apply to our own lives. We've missed a bit of Jacob's story, but I've given you kind of like the broad brushstroke of what Jacob experienced up until this point in his life. Now Jacob started out his life behind the 8 ball. He was pipped at the post right at his birth by his twin. And he constantly struggled throughout his life with the unfairness of the hand that life dealt him. His upbringing was one of struggle and conflict at home, which he exacerbated, so he wasn't totally innocent. And eventually he had to move out of home because his brother was threatening to kill him once his dad had passed away. He travelled to his extended family where he was deceived by his uncle and tricked into a marriage that created all sorts of grief for him later on. He worked for his uncle for around 20 years and his uncle continually ripped him off. But in the midst of everything that Jacob faced, God's hand remained on his life. And he was blessed by God to the extent that his unscrupulous uncle recognized that he himself was benefiting from God's hand being on Jacob, and he didn't want him to leave. Now, there are 3 things that are happening in the story of Jacob. Firstly, we have God's overarching plan for the redemption of humanity and the planet beginning to take shape in the background. God had promised that he would resolve the issue of sin that humanity faced after Adam and Eve's fall. And in the midst of the rise and fall of various kingdoms throughout the Middle East at that time, God's plan to send his son into the world to die for our sins was being set up through the establishment of a brand new nation of people who would provide the stage that would be instrumental in bringing the message of Jesus to the rest of the world. Secondly, we have God starting to use the fledgling nation of Israel as a shadow or precursor of what is to come. The nation of Israel would become an object lesson to the rest of the world, prophetically pointing to the future sacrifice of Jesus that would be made on our behalf. Yeah. And then thirdly, there was God's personal interaction in Jacob's life. Now, I'm sure that for Jacob, that third component was the most important priority to him, especially when he was younger. As time passed, as happened with many of the biblical characters that we read about in the Bible, his focus shifted later in life to a much broader perspective. It became more about legacy and God's plan for the next generation, and not so much about his own personal success and influence. Now, in all of the ups and downs of Jacob's story, we see one trait coming through time and time again. A trait that I believe was key to God's hand on his life. The key that attracted the attention of God. And it was this: Jacob never gave up. In season and out of season, regardless of what he faced, Jacob never gave up. We see it in his struggle at home, growing up with his dad, and his overt favoritism toward his twin. And then when he has to work for 7 days to receive Rachel's hand in marriage. When his uncle tricks him and he marries Leah to him instead, Jacob then agrees to work another 7 years so that he can marry Rachel as well. There's all sorts of strife between his 2 wives, which wouldn't have made his home life all that comfortable, but Jacob stays faithful to both of them. His uncle continues to try and rip him off, but he doesn't quit. It's not until God says it's time to head back home that Jacob finally leaves. When he meets God on the way home, he struggles with him and doesn't let him go until he agrees to bless him. Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome." Now, you might think that you haven't got all that much going for you. You might think that life has dealt you a poor hand. You might be struggling to hold your marriage together, or another family relationship that may have gone sour. You might feel like the world is against you when it comes to financial security and opportunities to advance in your career. Jacob knew all of that. Jacob knew what all of that was like. He lived it himself, and yet in spite of all the challenges that he kept on facing, he didn't quit. There's something powerful in knowing that others have walked the road that you find yourself on and come out the other end having overcome. The writer to the Hebrews used Jesus' example to encourage his readers to not give up in Hebrews chapter 12, reading from verse 1. "Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith, let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily trips us up. And let us run with endurance the race God has set before us. We do this by keeping our eyes on Jesus, the champion who initiates and perfects our faith. Because of the joy awaiting him, he endured the cross, disregarding its shame. Now he is seated in the place of honour beside God's throne. Think of all the hostility he endured from sinful people. Then you won't become weary and give up. After all, you have not given your lives in your struggle against sin." Now, we've already seen at the beginning of our series that God loves people who take him at his word and believe him when he says something. People who will do what he has asked. Now, to do that, to do what God has asked, requires perseverance. The ability to keep doing it regardless of any opposition we might face. Now, even though God was with Jacob all the way through his troubles, it's obvious in the midst of his troubles, Jacob was consumed at times with the unfairness of his situation. Jacob wasn't a superstar. It's not like he lived on a higher plane. Jacob and his wives were in no doubt that Laban was a charlatan and a swindler. Now God had, at various times in Jacob's life, connected with him. And what Jacob chose to do was to place more trust in his interactions with God and God's promises to him than the way he was treated by life and those around him. And it's the same challenge that each of us will face in our own lives. It will determine whether you'll end up walking with God all the days of your life, or whether you'll be one of those people who will be led away by the disappointments and the unfairness of your situation, seeking to take things into your own hands, and in the process becoming the Lord of your own life. And that never ends well. If you can't control what happens to you, then how on earth do you think you could ever be the Lord of your life? It's a fantasy that's foisted on us by our own egos and the prevailing spirit of our age. Jacob's example is one of persistent faithfulness in the face of personal shortcomings and unfair circumstances that went on for years. There was no quick fix here. Jacob worked for his uncle for 20 years. His entire childhood was one of strife. And actually, as you read more of Jacob's story, you realise that his own family life, with his own offspring, his own children, was messed up really, really badly. Actually, when you read through Jacob's story, it's only when he gets to the very last bit of his life that things seem to calm down a little bit for him, because Rachel's passed away. He's only got one wife, and his sons are all grown up, and they've sorted some stuff out. But there was a lot of turmoil, a lot of conflict in his family that he had to go through till he finally ended up in that place. So Jacob had to persevere. He had to keep on keeping on. The hope that his story gives us, though, is that God is more than able to keep us on the path that he wants us to walk on, despite everything that happens in us or to us. And I want you to remember that we have far more evidence to back up our faith in God than any of the patriarchs ever had. They didn't have the book of Psalms that they could pull out and read when faced with reversals in their lives. They didn't have the written works of the prophets or Solomon's wisdom recorded in Proverbs to help them steer their way through life. They didn't have the life and words of Jesus to hold them steady when faced by opportunistic kings and government officials. But then they also didn't have the challenges that we face today. Every generation has its own giants to overcome, and persistence in the face of opposition is needed just as much today as it was then.